The war on terror, the fight continues in countries far from Afghanistan. CBS's Holly Williams recently joined Yemen's military on their front lines. A civil war is underway, and al-Qaeda is using the country as a base for attacks.
Yemeni soldiers took us to the front line, where they're fighting a deadly war for control of this barren desert. These are government forces, battling rebels who've seized the capital and swaths of land.
So there's been back and forth from both sides. These men are saying that their enemy is about 500 yards in that direction.
The Saudi Arabian government invited us to witness this conflict. They're backing the Yemeni government. The US accuses Iran of arming the rebels. Both sides have been accused of possible war crimes. The conflict's killed nearly 250,000 people, according to the UN, some victims of starvation. And in the anarchy, al-Qaeda has thrived here, the group's most dangerous affiliate, according to some, despite years of US drone strikes. Al-Qaeda's Yemen branch trained the man who attempted to down a US airliner on Christmas Day in 2009 with explosives sewn into his underpants, and claimed responsibility for a 2015 shooting in Paris that killed 12 and an attack in Pensacola in 2019 that left 3 dead. Sultan Al-Arada is the governor of Yemen's northern Marib province.
What would it take to get rid of al-Qaeda in Yemen?
We need a state, he told us. If we had a functioning government, we could clean them out. More than 4 million Yemenis have fled their homes, many ending up in dusty camps like this one. 12-year-old Abdullah told us he wants to be a doctor when he grows up. But as long as the war rages, there's little hope for these children's future, just the desperation that al-Qaeda feeds off.
Latest news out of Yemen. Headliner: Yemen appoints new negotiators to proceed talks with Houthis. Yemen has been mired in a civil war since late 2014, when the Houthi militia stormed several northern cities and forced the Saudi-backed Yemeni government out of Sana'a. The problem becomes sectarian violence creates fervent groups like al-Qaeda and their affiliates in Yemen to come join the fight, because the Saudi government, even though it neglects the inclination that they are funding these groups to fight against the Shia and the Houthis, who are Iranian-backed, these groups were founded upon the principles of the kingdom themselves. According to the Associated Press, the U.S. Navy on Tuesday found 70 tons of missile fuel components hidden among bags of fertilizer aboard a ship bound to Yemen from Iran. The first such seizure in the country, year-long war, as a ceasefire has broken down. The Navy said the amount of ammonium perchlorate discovered could fuel more than a dozen medium-range ballistic missiles, the same weapons Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have used to target both forces allied to the country's internally recognized government and the Saudi-led coalition that supports them. The apparent rearming efforts come as Iran has threatened Saudi Arabia, the United States, and other nations over the months-long protests calling for the overthrow of the Islamic Republic's theocracy. Tehran blames foreign powers rather than its own frustrated population for fomenting the protests, which have at least 344 killed, 25,000 people arrested amid a widening crackdown on dissent. Commander Timothy Hawkins, a spokesman for the Navy's Mid-East-based Fifth Fleet, told the Associated Press, quote, "This type of shipment and just a massive volume of explosive material is a serious concern because it is destabilizing. The unlawful transport of weapons from Iran to Yemen leads to instability and violence," end quote. The United Nations arm embargo has prohibited weapons transferred to the Houthis since 2014. Yemen's an internationally recognized government appointed a new negotiating team to lead peace talks with Houthi militia over ending their years-long military conflict. The newly formed committee was chosen by the country's Presidential Leadership Council to equally represent the people in Yemen's southern and northern provinces, clarifying that politicians from the pro-independence Southern Transitional Council were included in the negotiating committee for the first time. Yemen's Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a brief press statement saying that the Houthis continued to reject new proposals suggesting extending the United Nations brokered truce for a further 6 months and broadening it to include new aspects of consensus. And that's the latest news. And now my thoughts. For those who are not well versed or understanding of what is happening, I will give you a general rundown of what is happening in Yemen, because I think it's quite important and it's underrepresented by the American legacy media. The Yemen civil war began in September 2014 when the Houthi forces took over the capital of Sana'a, which was followed by a rapid Houthi takeover of the government. And on March 21st, 2015, the Houthi-led Supreme Revolutionary Committee declared a general mobilization to overthrow then-President Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi and expand their control by driving into the southern provinces. The Houthi offensive, allied with military forces loyal to Salah, began fighting the next day in the Lahaj government. And by March 25th, Lahaj fell to the Houthis and they reached the outskirts of Aden, the seat of power for the Hadi's government. Hadi fled the country the same day, and currently a coalition led by the Gulf and Saudi Arabia launched military operations by using airstrikes to restore the former Yemeni government. Although there was no direct intervention by Iran, who supports the Houthis, the conflict has been seen by Western sources, take that with a grain of salt, as an extension of the Iran-Saudi Arabian proxy conflict, which is reasonable speculation, and as a means to combat Iranian influence in the region. Now, there are no winning sides here. Just like with every war, it seems that everybody's guilty at some extent, but what level of guilt is assigned to each country? The Middle East is at war between the Sunni and the Shia, and this is due to Saudi Arabia's virulent hatred to Shia countries like Iran and Lebanon, Syria. And by the way, who are the United States attacking? Iran, Syria, destroying the country in the process and failed in their coup d'etat of Bashar al-Assad, the president. And of course, Iran looms large. And as long as you cut off the extension from Iran to Lebanon, which is home of Hezbollah, the political military arm of Lebanon, and a Shia military-led military committee, which is the enemy to who? Two powerful Middle East countries, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Nevertheless, it is the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, who are fueling groups like Al-Qaeda in Yemen, in the Arabian Peninsula, in Saudi Arabia, and former groups like Abu Sayyaf and Jemaah Islamiyah in the Southeast Asia, proxy affiliates to Al-Qaeda in the 90s and early 2000s. We have war with Saudi Arabia. We have war with Bahrain. We have war with United Arab Emirates. No. So this is more so a political war than it is a religious war. It's a combination of both. Now, the politics involves geopolitics of numerous countries, including the major players, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. And it seems that it's a one-sided battle because the United States are backing their allies in the region in their fight against Iranian, and Shia-led coalitions. The question is, why isn't the media reporting this, and why aren't you being paid any attention to this? Because they would rather have you focus of another war, which doesn't have the same calamities in Yemen, because they're not white, and that is Ukraine, which is a Democratic-funded war led by the Biden administration, which goes all the way back even into the Bush administration. If you go back further enough about why we're having this conflict in the first place, which is also another lie by the legacy media told to you. All you're told is that Russia is the evil country and they're the ones who invaded Ukraine. Well, it's not that simple. No war is simple. And so what I'm hoping to share with you is attention to the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, which is Yemen. Now, according to the United Nations, over 355,000 people are dead, approximate, and over 3 million displaced. Now, the international community has condemned the Saudi Arabian-led bombing campaign, which has included widespread, indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas inside the Houthi-controlled western part of Yemen. And according to the Yemen Data Project, the bombing campaign has killed or injured over 20,000 approximate civilians as of March of 2022. The United States, in return, has provided intelligence and logistical support for the Saudi-led campaign, which continues despite the Biden administration's pledges to withdraw, and that's how he ran on. And when he got in office the first week, he broke that pledge and gave Saudi Arabia the largest military aid deal in the nation's history. Over hundreds of millions of dollars in this crisis that's happening in Yemen, precipitated by the United States and the State Department, who consider Saudi Arabia an ally only because we regulate the oil market. And if we don't speak out on crimes such as this, then we have no right to speak out when the crimes of the state visit upon us.